Our second speaker is Ansy Boothroyd, and she also comes to art and to our topic through music. She was a postgraduate student at the Royal College of Music, following her degree in MML in Modern and Medieval Languages at Cambridge. Not content to limit herself to one media, Ansy's career has followed the path of music and sculpture. She's worked as a freelance singer, as a translator of libretti and sleeve notes. She teaches singing. She runs 2 choirs in her spare time. But she also became a potter in the early 1990s, before turning to sculpting stone too, which is no mean feat. As if this was not impressive enough, Ansy writes poetry and is currently putting together the final touches to her first novel. I'm hoping she's going to share her secrets for multitasking and exploring her many passions with us. Join me please in welcoming Ansy Boothroyd.
Good morning. When I first sat down to think about what I was going to say today, I decided I'd start by brainstorming and just list everything that came into my head. So I opened my laptop and off I went. I'd only written 1 line when I looked up at the screen and I realised I'd made 2 mistakes already. So I went back and put a capital letter at the beginning where there should have been one and sorted out the typo at the other end, and that felt much better. Then I realised what I'd just done. This is what I had so far. You have to laugh at yourself if you're a perfectionist, but actually it is a terrible curse, particularly if you're a performer. But being born of perfectionist parents, I grew up believing not so much that if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing well, but rather that a thing is not worth doing unless you're going to do it very well indeed, preferably perfectly. Interestingly, my parents made an exception for performance, but I couldn't do that. And so by the time I was leaving the Royal College of Music, I was suffering from perfectionism and feeling a lot of performance anxiety. I was doing some good concerts, but I was doing some pretty poor ones as well, and I hated the inconsistency of my nerves. I found myself wondering whether I really was meant to be a singer, and I started to ask the question, how do I know that this is a thing worth doing? Well, that's what I want to talk about today, because I think that that question lies at the root of all our fears about engaging with the arts, but I think that the answer to that question allows us to live with real passionate absorption. Whenever we question whether we can or should do something that we yearn to do, we need to remember what we know in the depths of our souls. We're all born with the seeds of who we are to become planted somewhere inside us. Thomas More, in his book Care of the Soul, talks about us having an acorn within. And that acorn is what starts to unfold as soon as we're old enough to express ourselves. We may have an urge to paint, to sing, to dance, to nurture, to explore. We talk about that urge as being our calling, and it lives somewhere inside us, and it stirs periodically throughout our lives. For the artist, it might stir in response to any number of different things. But I think it's almost certain to stir when we're looking at the wonders of nature, when we're feeling heightened emotions, both negative and positive, or when we're in the presence of great works of art. Any of those things can fill us with a sense of awe, and awe, of course, is one of the definitions of fear, as in fear of God. And suddenly we feel ourselves connected to the deepest sense of who we are. That sense of awe in the presence of great works of art is often all the more intense for our recognition that a human being has created this thing. And on the one hand, it seems incredible that a person can create something that can fill us with such a profound response. But on the other hand, I think we understand somewhere deep inside us exactly how a human can do that. Because to quote Hildegard of Bingen, the medieval spiritual healer, poet, musician, and mystic, God calls us to be like him. He calls us to be creators. Whether you want to talk about that in terms of God, or whether you prefer to use the words love, joy, truth, we do recognize in these moments of deep connection to ourselves that we are here predominantly to be creators. Fundamentally, that's through the act of procreation. But as humans, we have the capacity to create in all manner of other ways too, and there's a deep yearning to do that. So the artist or would-be artist now feels a longing to engage with the artistic process through the arts. He may have an image of something and long to make manifest something which is now manifest in his thoughts. But any time from then on, fear might creep in. Now, fear is defined in the dictionary primarily as a feeling of anxiety in the face of impending danger or pain. I couldn't resist showing you a photo that I found on the internet which just sums that up perfectly for me. This is at the vet's. I love that dog. He knows he's about to feel pain. And I think we all understand that if we're about to give a public performance, we might feel just like that dog. But fear in front of a blank canvas or an empty page, or particularly if you're someone like Harper Lee and you've already produced a best-selling novel, so you know you can do it, fear that stops someone from having a real go at a career that looks perfectly plausible, or that stops the amateur from even signing up for a workshop in something that they long to do. Where's the impending danger or pain in any of that? Well, the fact is that we do fear that if we engage in this art, we may find we're not able to do the thing we dream of doing. We might not have a career. We might not produce the best-selling novel. We may even be turned away from the workshop. And that indeed would be deeply painful. But all of this fear stems from the fact of our losing sight of, or maybe misunderstanding, the whole point of engaging in the creative process. The point is not to create a great work or to be a great artist. The point is to engage in the creative process. There isn't a goal other than to immerse ourselves in the work. We may get results, we may not, but the process of creating is one of deep engagement, single focus, presence, stillness, calm, flow, possibly joy, possibly even awe. And that's the reward. In that space, just as in the moment of inspiration, we know ourselves deeply as creators. So why is it so hard for so many of us to remain focused on the process of creating rather than worrying about the outcome? Well, I think that we live in a very results-based society. Our education system rewards children for results far more than for learning. And children are encouraged to do what they're best at, not what they love most. As adults, we show the world who we are by what we have and what we do. But we lay a lot of store on wealth, fame, and success, and not so much on stillness, presence, and creativity. And of course, as artists, we're working with a marketable commodity, and the age of patronage is all but gone. It's very hard to divorce yourself from the predominant focus of the world you live in. Of course, I didn't know any of this when I set out on my career. But it's really interesting now to look back and see how my whole journey has been shaped by my focus on either process or results, and what caused the difference in that. From the time I was old enough to express any of my acorn traits, it's been clear there are three strands to me: musical, cerebral, and manually creative. I sang before I could talk. And I remember when I was very young falling in love with a recording of Isabel Bailey singing Poulenc's Gloria, and I knew I absolutely had to sing that work one day. I wrote stories all the time, and my very earliest memory is from the age of 2, when someone showed me how to hold a pencil properly, and I can still remember the feeling of absolute excitement at the fact that a whole world now opened up to me, even though I still hadn't quite cracked reading. And I made things all the time. In fact, when I came home from primary school, pretty well every day, my question to my mum was, what shall I make tonight? When I moved on to secondary school, the focus started to shift. With talk already of a possible career in singing, it felt as if every performance I gave now marked my progress towards being a professional singer. I stopped writing stories when a teacher at school told me I was never going to finish the novel I said I was writing. But anyway, by now I had to focus on my schoolwork because the plan was that I would get very good results in the subject I was best at, French, so that I would have a passport into Trinity, where I would be able to spend my whole time singing and hopefully get a fallback degree into the bargain. I can't believe I just confessed that in Cambridge in public. The only part of me that was untainted by this obsession really with results was the arts and crafts side. And funnily enough, I was probably helped by the very negative feedback I had from my art teachers, who made it quite clear that I was no artist. But that took away all the pressure. There were no expectations, and I could simply enjoy making things for fun if I ever had any spare time. But out of that, a couple of years into my career, two things had become very skewed. Firstly, despite or perhaps because of several truly awesome experiences on the concert platform, a particular highlight being, not surprisingly, my first performance of Poulenc's Gloria, here actually in Trinity Chapel, when I simply opened my mouth and let Isabel Bailey pour through me. Somehow I'd forgotten the fact that I actually loved to sing. The whole thing had become so focused on performance, and I didn't know how all those perfect performances had ever happened. So I was growing increasingly afraid that they might never happen again. But I'd failed to really understand that there was no magic in it. The simple fact was that I wasn't engaging enough in the process of singing and in perfecting my mastery of the tools of my trade, i.e. my vocal technique. Performance grows out of technical competence, but technical competence doesn't grow out of performance, and I really hadn't taken that on board enough. The other thing that had happened is that in this tunnel-visioned focus on singing, I'd really lost touch with 2/3 of my acorn self, and they were now lying dormant. Mercifully, around this time, a chance encounter with a rather ordinary object stirred one of those dormant parts of me back into life. The object was a cereal bowl. It had been made by a friend of mine, and I was staying here with her while I was on tour, and she was eating her breakfast out of it. And when she told me that she'd made it, I had an immediate yearning to know what it felt like to eat my breakfast out of a bowl that I'd made with my own fair hands. And there began a journey which was to be the perfect example of process-focused living. It started from sheer curiosity and passion. I had seen an object, it was manifest in my thoughts, and I wanted to make it manifest in the flesh. Of course, I didn't have any of the requisite skills, but as soon as I got home, I signed up for a pottery class. And when I first sat down at the wheel in front of my first lump of clay, feeling rather anxious, I suddenly remembered some words that my music teacher had said at school. She'd said, if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Well, to my perfectionist self at the time, that had made no sense. And of course, it has no place on the concert platform. But there, in that moment of fear in front of my first lump of clay, it was a wonderful release. And I could put my foot down on that pedal and be instantly drawn into the mesmerizing process of shaping clay. Within weeks, I'd bought my own wheel, and within a couple of years, I was combining my new love of clay with my love of music, making a range of figures playing musical instruments. I had very positive feedback from friends and family for these. And so in the end, I decided I was going to dare to walk into a gallery and find out whether somebody would sell my work. And my pottery career took off without my ever having intended to have one. Meanwhile, an artist friend encouraged me to have a go at stone sculpting. And the wonderful thing about working in stone is that you can't help but be focused on the process because it's such slow work. It's also a great medium for allowing the creative process to take you where it will, because stone doesn't always want to be what you want it to be. When a friend bought me a 3-foot-high lump of stone and asked me to make her a human figure, I walked round it for a long time, and then I had to go back to her and say, "Would you mind if it's an angel, because I can see a pair of wings in there?" Luckily, she didn't mind. I worked on that piece for a month, and it was finally finished. And when I looked at it for the first time, I had one of the most extraordinary moments of my life. I actually felt awestruck. I knew I'd been there for the whole of that month, chipping and polishing, but now that the angel was separate from me, I felt I had absolutely no idea where it had come from. To feel awe about your own work is actually deeply moving. There is no sense of pride, no sense of self-congratulation, simply a feeling of honour at having had the privilege of being so deeply immersed in the creative process that the work's created itself. Around my 40th birthday, for some reason, my acorn storyteller started to stir. So I gave myself a present of a week away with a notebook and no expectations, and to my utter amazement, a novel started to write itself. I had some truly awesome experiences of pouring words out onto a page and just letting the novel take me where it wanted to go, and knowing myself deeply through that creative process. Subsequently, I had some truly awful experiences of writer's block, where that primary school teacher was back on my shoulder saying, "You're never going to finish this." Well, I am just finishing it, and I have absolutely no idea whether anyone will ever publish it, but I do know that writing is an urge that I will always honour for the rest of my life. So what of the singing? Well, to my astonishment, I think I can honestly say now that it has been a thing worth doing badly as much as it's been worth doing well, because I've learnt so much from it. Finally understanding that I had really lost touch with the process of singing, I found myself a wonderful new teacher and spent a couple of years just working to hone my skills, get mastery of my vocal technique, and really just sing for the pleasure of hearing my own voice again. Out of that have come two things. Firstly, I've given some of the best performances of my life. And secondly, I've become passionate about teaching. I teach a lot of professional and semi-professional singers, but I also work a lot with people who may never be performers, but who have a yearning to hear their own voices, who feel that singing is some part of their acorn self and want to know what it feels like to sing. And that can be really important work. It makes perfect sense to me that after a very moving session with a woman who'd felt really blocked for many years and who then heard her voice ring free for the first time in years, she actually thanked me for saving her life. So here I am now, and across the spectrum of all the arts I've engaged with, I think I've probably had pretty much every conceivable experience of the creative process, except for feeling writer's block, because my first novel was such a bestseller that I might not be able to do another one, but I'm prepared to go through that. Fear and love have actually become my greatest teachers, because the presence of either in one area of my life shines a light on its absence in the others, and that's what helps direct me onwards on this fascinating journey. For many years, when somebody asked me what I did for a living, I would tailor my response depending on who was asking, because I still felt that being part-time in several things meant that I wasn't a proper anything. Now I know I am a proper Jill of all trades, a proper Renaissance woman. I do what I do, and I love the fact that my life is always changing shape. I never know when something new might call me to be even more fully who I am. But I do know now that when it does, I will always answer that call, because I've come to trust that whether I do the thing well or badly, as long as it's something I yearn to do, it will always be a thing worth doing. Thank you.